Stephen Moore is a political strategist who spent 7 years as chief of staff and senior leadership aide in the United States Congress, developing relationships with senior policymakers across the US and around the world. He worked on Capitol Hill in the House of Representatives, mostly as chief of staff of former Republican Pete Roskam, the former chief deputy GOP whip. In that role, Moore was one of the most influential staff members on the Republican side of the aisle, and he's now using these extraordinary contacts and this extraordinary experience to help advocate for Ukraine, and not just Ukraine as a country, but what it represents. And that is a bulwark against Russian imperialism, Russian attempts to destroy democracy, institutions, and all the things that we value and that make our societies work in the way they do and make them rich as well. This is the third time that I'm delighted to say Stephen's come on for a direct interview. We've also had an episode that talks about his extraordinary film as well, which I'm going to get into. Talk a little bit about just as a bit of a plug to kick things off. Stephen, welcome back.
Man, always great to be with you.
It is a real pleasure, and we had the pleasure of meeting face to face earlier this year in Odessa, which was a
Odessa,
complete thrill.
Odessa Black Sea Security Forum. Yeah, man, it was in that sort of big opera theater, and you're in there, and you feel like James Bond, right? You feel like you're in a James Bond movie. So you're in the former Soviet Union in this opera theater, and you're talking about foreign policy. It was cool.
It was great, and there were some fantastic speakers there. And I always wonder what the impact of those events were. But you were also doing the screening of your film, and or at least we saw the trailer version. We saw the short version of it, incredibly impactful. So before we jump in to what we're going to discuss, which is I would call it Trumpology in a way, Trumpology, and how we get US more US support for Ukrainian victory. But before we do, the film, how's it going? What's the impact? And
Oh
just tell the
man.
audience what it's about.
Oh yeah, it's great. So you know, there's not been a lot of Republican support, a lot of conservative support for Ukraine in a long time. We are now in a position where Trump voters are more likely to support military aid to Ukraine than at any time since the fall of 2022. So we're in a really good space, and one of the things that we've been doing is just giving good information to Trump voters, and what you find, and part of that is like giving people a reason to care. Why should I care about Ukraine? It's like all the way over there. The people talk with a funny accent. I don't even know what borscht is. People keep talking about it. And so what we do is we give them in a way to identify it. And one of those ways is with our film series. It's a Faith Under Siege, and it talks to American Christians. It's American Christians going to Ukraine, talking to Ukrainian Christians, and letting them tell their stories so that other American Christians can get a sense of what it's like to try to worship God in a place where Russian soldiers are standing at the door of your church. And so that's a really effective way just to bring Ukraine home to people. And we recently conducted a poll that showed that about 19% of American conservatives had seen, read, or heard something about our film. Now, a much lower percentage had actually watched it, but that's still really good, because it's all about getting out the message. So we're on Angel Studios, which is like Netflix for Christians, and the movie's A Faith Under Siege. Just go to a faithundersiege.com and have a look at it.
It's fantastically moving as well. And I have to sort of, lay my cards out. I am a fairly virulent atheist, but I was absolutely moved by the stories, because you see extraordinary community on show. You see bravery. You see incredible resilience. So if people are thinking, you know what, I just don't want something that's going to be a bit preachy and whatever, and I'm not bought into that ideology. It's nothing about that. It's about how human beings under extreme duress sort of coalesce with incredible sort of bravery to help each other survive and resist, dare I say it, authoritarianism, because where the ability to practice belief is challenged, you can guarantee that the free speech, free assembly, and all the other freedoms are also challenged at the same time. By losing one, you lose all the others.
Yeah, completely agree. No matter what you believe, it's being suppressed by the Russians in occupied Ukraine. So yeah, and we focused on Christians because when I'm a Christian, it was moving to me, as you point out. It's just a moving set of stories. And yeah, I've got my friend from grad school is like you. He's a devout atheist, and he teared up at the end of the movie. So it's just a moving film. And
Yeah.
listen, I'm really proud to have been a part of it, and would welcome your viewers to have a look at it, and feel free to reach out to me and give me comments, questions, or
Yeah.
funny stories.
There's a couple
So
of films everyone should see. There's Faith Under Siege, Kiev of Mine, and Steel Porcupine. These are three which I think people should absolutely see, where foreign filmmakers have come in and really tried to tell the Ukrainian story. Then we have a couple like 20 Years in Mariupol from a Ukrainian filmmaker. But these are things if people are looking for something to really immerse themselves more into. And then there's Winter on Fire, which is now quite an old one, but that one is about Maidan and the sort of, the passion and desire for freedom. All these films also indirectly touch upon. Now, I've been told not to call it disinformation because that's a very unattractive term, and anybody who's somehow been sucked into a Russian narrative or got a distorted view, let's say, of the reality, and they haven't directly experienced the reality of Ukraine or necessarily even talked to Ukrainians, they will have been sucked into what the experts would call disinformation. But you can't tell that to people. You can't tell that that's what they're saying because they're not going to be receptive to change their point of view. If
no
you
one
if you
wants to be
put
told
that
they're
label.
stupid. Yes.
No,
Yeah.
exactly. And we also know that disinformation exists on many, many levels.
Yeah.
You can be as smart as you like, and you can be relatively well informed about history, and you can still fall for some layer or level of so-called disinformation. So we try to just sort of say indirectly, like, well, that's interesting, but I've been here, and this isn't what we see on the ground. There are techniques to try and turn people around. Film seems to be one of those techniques, the visual medium, to try and undermine narratives. Is that one of your conscious purposes here? Because one of the key narratives, especially amongst in the US and amongst evangelicals and conservatives, is that Russia is true orthodoxy. It's a religious conservative country, and Ukraine is trying to ban freedom of worship. Whereas what they're really doing is shutting down the Moscow Spy Church, which is an extension of the KGB. Let's be frank.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, let me tell the folks watching this why I'm here. And I came here on day 5 of the war because I have Ukrainian friends and I wanted to help. I stayed because the international community really fell short in that first year. So I did a lot of humanitarian aid work. We got a couple of $1 million worth of aid to areas that needed it, and areas near the front. And and then, and then two things happened. I met a guy named Victor Chernaevsky, and I was working in a co-working facility at the end of 2022 in Kiev. And this dude comes up to me and says, "Hi, my name is Victor. I'm an evangelical Christian." All right, dude. you know, our in America, our evangelical Christians are not quite that evangelical. Evangelical means spreading the good news, right? And so I'm like, "What you got?" And so he tells me how he was a volunteer in Luhansk in 2014, and he was taking families out, taking groups of people out. And one group included a newborn infant and a pregnant woman. And the Russians pulled him out of his truck and took him to the basement. And you and I know this is a euphemism for being tortured, right? If someone's being tortured, they say, I was taken to the basement. And so Victor was in the basement for 25 days, including one day when a Russian Orthodox priest was walking by his cell and heard him praying with his cellmate. And the priest says, "You're not Orthodox, are you?" And as we've established, Victor is very forward about his faith. And no, I'm not. I'm an evangelical Christian. And so the guards took him out of the cell, took him to the torture room, strapped him to a chair, and tased him with electricity while the Russian Orthodox priest tried to cast demons out of him for being an evangelical Christian. Yeah, I find that as mind blowing as you do, right? I heard that. I was like, oh my
It's
gosh.
where in the New Testament does it say that that is how you treat not just fellow believers? I mean, it's clearly written there. You're supposed to reach out to strangers, people who don't share your same faith, and treat
Yeah.
them as you treat your own. And this is on a par, I would say, with not just idolatry, but it is extraordinary superstition, not religion. The scene you're describing there.
Yeah. Oh, it's just medieval, you know? And then just a couple of months later, I heard Tucker Carlson say that Zelensky was persecuting Christians. And I'm like, I'm living in Kyiv. Nope, not seeing that here. And so since then, seeing Republicans drift away from Ukraine for reasons that are not bounded in fact. um I decided to pursue this and just make people understand. Yeah, it's just really galling to hear Tucker Carlson say that. I'm like, what? And so I decided to make a mission out of telling people the truth, telling Christians in America the truth. And I'll tell you what, I spoke at the Turning Point USA Pastors Conference in August of this year in Los Angeles, which would be the last one that Charlie Kirk ever spoke at. And we didn't know that at the time, of course, but, and 500 very, very conservative pastors that support Trump. All of them were very respectful. And like I spoke on stage for 5 minutes about Ukraine, about Christians in Ukraine. And, like dozens of them came up afterwards and said, thank you. We don't know what to believe. There's all this stuff going out there. We don't know what to, thank you for your firsthand description of what's going on. And, I got a lot of applause, man. There wasn't a lot of people walking out of the room when I was talking. So, so when you tell people the truth, they make good decisions. And that's what we're doing.
This is one of the challenges, isn't it? Because in our fragmented media environment, there are people who inadvertently will pick up on things that don't reflect reality. There are people who will latch on to narratives that have been very cleverly crafted by smart people in Russia to create this alternative view of reality. Some will do this inadvertently. Some will do it because these narratives can be more simplistic than reality, and people can make money. It supports their business models. Others will be doing it, and we mentioned Tucker here. We don't want to get sued, but the consistency with which he repeats Russian narratives, he lives them, he inhabits them, and he's not a stupid man. He's a pretty smart guy. I'm betting he kind of knows some of the reality and chooses to craft these stories because it's profitable to do so. I what should we be aiming for? We're not going to change his mind, but will we be able to change those who's inadvertently are telling these stories? And can we show them a way that they can still be popular and profitable by saying something that is more truthful?
Yeah, that's a really good insight. And just going back to Tucker Carlson for a second, you may not have seen it, but uh, he recently had Nick Fuentes on his show, which I don't know who Nick Fuentes is, other than he's apparently a Nazi, you know, and and Tucker has this method of sitting slack jawed,
Hmm.
and just yeah, exactly, and letting whoever whatever propagandists he's got on there just having their way uncritically, doesn't ask any critical questions, and the conservative Jewish community, the Republican Jewish community, is outraged. They're up in arms. They're going after him, and the Christian community as well, because the Christians and Jews. I mean, a lot of Christians view themselves as the same faith as the Jews, right? And so there's a lot of pro-Israel Christians, And they're listening to this stuff and they're like, no, man, we're not having this. So the really good news is that Tucker is losing credibility. And I think that's something that you can just do over time. We, the pro-Ukrainian community, don't have the resources. But listen, man, there's a lot of us that have been telling the truth about Tucker, and it helps. I mean, we've got a short video. Welcome folks to go to our website at a fake at Faith Under Siege, where there's a video we said Putin's church versus Ukraine's Christians that explains the false Tucker Carlson narrative. And I mean, we've got tens of thousands of views. I don't know how many, lots.
And it's not random, and it fulfills a purpose. And one of those purposes is to get Ukraine's partners to disengage, to not implement sanctions, to not provide aid. I mean, there is a strategic purpose to these narratives, even if those who have latched onto them don't quite realize it or not. What we've seen under Trump, of course, is we have not had military aid packages in the way that we had under Biden. We know that under Biden, they would look at what was needed and they tend to sort of, well, provide half and send it, late.
Yeah,
Just
let's be
because,
truthful. The,
yeah,
the the Biden administration emptied the Pentagon's trash and sent it to Ukraine,
yeah.
and they sent it late. you know,
And they
uh,
listed it all as list price, brand new list price, etc. And there's a certain bureaucratic box ticking that's a lot of it smacked of sort of doing things in a fairly bureaucratic way, not an effective way. But I think they were also genuinely terrified by the nuclear threats. They were deeply penetrated by Russian nuclear threats. And that's not just Biden. I think many US administrations have really fallen for Russia's sort of nuclear cudgel. It seems that President Trump also is hesitant on tomahawks precisely because every time it looks like some effective munition is going to be supplied or sold or whatever, they wheel out the nuclear threat. They've got some new super duper pooper missile that's going to wipe everybody out. This stuff kind of works, unfortunately. But we have seen some movement. I mean, at least President Trump is no longer daily amplifying Russian narratives that are injected into his circle of advisors. It seems there are genuinely some people around him who are like, hang on a second, this guy is, to use the English vernacular, he's taking the piss, right? He has no intention of really stopping the war, and he's mocking us. I mean, some I think are realizing that.
Putin is, yeah, Putin,
No,
yeah. So yeah, listen, I would agree. And going back to Biden just for a second, as I recall, he said in May of 2022 he was not going to use U.S. weapons inside Ukraine, and we waited for 3 weeks before he left office for him to do that. And so, which means he didn't think it was bad policy. If he had thought it was bad policy, he wouldn't have done it. He just lacked the courage to deal with whatever blowback came from that decision, which was nothing. Which was characterized, his fear forward foreign policy, and we can make the argument that if Biden hadn't given Russia sanctuary for years, then you and I would be having a different conversation right now, and we would be finding other things to talk about. There would not be a
that's it.
war.
Well,
So
potentially 23, 24, it would have been over, or Russia would have realized that the cost was too high to continue.
yeah.
It's the delusion that Putin has been allowed to foster and maintain that he can win. We have allowed him to continue in that delusion. Therefore, he's continued the war. I think it's relatively simple.
Well, I'll tell you, there's an interesting thing so on my Substack, which is Tales from World War III, stephenmoore.substack.com, I wrote an article on the nuclear psychosis that Russia is projecting, and these are their words. Now, you may recall in last year, in the fall of last year. There was a Justice Department investigation into Tenet Media, which is half a dozen conservative influencers who got $10 million from people that turned out to be agents of RT, Russia Today. Um, and they had like 300 pages of documents that they fished out of Kremlin email. So there's an email hack on the Kremlin, and they got all this really fascinating stuff. And I read all of it twice, and then read some of it more times because it's just fascinating. One thing that was unreported from that is that if you look at it, they've got the campaign plans for Russian propaganda there, and just like any campaign that I've ever worked on. And um, and there was a meeting which they have notes from in April of 2022, where the deputy chief of staff to Putin, who's in charge of Russian propaganda, says our top priority is to create a nuclear psychosis in Washington and the West. And now, psychosis is, if you look at the definition, uh, something that seems to be happening that is not actually happening. It's in and so that was their words. And and if you look at it, they've lived up to that because I think it was United 24 had 26 times that the Putin had rattled the nuclear saber in response to, if Abrams get to Ukraine, we're going to use nukes. If F-16s get to Ukraine, we're going to use nukes. If Sweden joins NATO, if Finland joins NATO, right?
Storm
And I live in
shadows,
yeah, I live in Ukraine, and I live in Kyiv, and we get a lot of rain here, but none of the clouds are mushroom shaped. Again, you got to pay attention to these nuclear threats, but you shouldn't be paralyzed by them.
And when British and French Storm Shadows took out the um, Black Sea Fleet headquarters, that to me should have ended the debate. Look, we've used our missions to destroy a military headquarters and an absolute symbol of Russian power in this invasion, and nothing. They've got nothing to respond with, and there's been many instances since. But it does seem that once psychosis sets in, it's very difficult to dislodge. But now we have something I think sort of interesting. I don't want to, read too much into it because I know things change day by day. But it does seem that Lavrov, as Putin's right-hand person, has massively overplayed his cards. They have finally caused Senator Rubio to, you know, draw a line in the sand, something which we've been waiting a long time for, let's be frank. But he seems to have conveyed the message back to President Trump. These guys are not serious. They're mocking us. They're just playing the process to buy themselves time. And this was interestingly shown with Kirill Dmitriev, Putin's little business czar, who was sent to try and sort of rescue the narrative. He was called a propagandist to his face, and apart from a few, let's say, sort of clickbait media, he wasn't really given any serious attention, and he was pretty much shown the door.
He was called a propagandist to his face. Tell me more about that. That's awesome.
That was Besant. That was the
Oh
economic
yeah, that's
secretary.
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's
So
super
someone
cool.
actually
Yeah.
senior in the administration just said, no, no, we're not taking any more of this BS. Off you go.
Yeah, well, it's frustrating to me to see some of this stuff, which is, no, listen, Steve Witkoff, oh, we're going to do a lot of business with Russia. We're going to open up a lot of economic trade. Well, when was the last time you, Jonathan, looked in your home, picked up something and said, "Oh yeah, made in Russia"?
I think that
Nobody has that
never.
experience.
I don't
Yeah.
drink vodka, so the answer is never.
Yeah. So yes, no one does. Russia does not make anything. They are a gas station with an army. Their biggest export is AK-47s and other weapons, and probably their biggest export, I would say, is AKs. And so there is not a lot they have to offer. At the height of trade, which has been 20 years ago or so, they had something like $19 billion worth of trade in the United States, which is nothing, and now it's like down to $3 billion. And so just, they don't make, have you ever, does anyone have a lotta? You know, no,
Strangely
nobody
enough,
wants their
no, no,
cars,
no.
and so
I mean, their
yeah,
cars
they
mostly contain Western or other components anyway, now probably Chinese components. So their cars, their
yeah.
planes, their weapons are highly dependent on advanced Western components in any case.
Totally. Yeah. Ladas, and this is funny. Again, I wrote about this on my Substack Tales from World War III. The Ladas were introduced in 1989, the newest model of Lada, and it was ended in 2012. And their one design change was they changed the color of the bumper from chrome to black. That's Russian innovation, right?
Yeah.
So
Except, of course, like
yeah.
like the Kremlin, which was built by Italians and designed by Italians, their cars were also built by Italians.
Yeah, Fiat. Yeah, in
There's a
2012,
city
Fiat came
called
in. That's when they
Togliatti,
changed.
which was
Yeah.
designed and built by Italians who brought the production line over, and then the ice cream, which of course Russians immensely pride themselves on. I have actually had some of the best ice cream ever in Russia, and they're immensely proud of it. If you get the right one, the right day, the right seller, this stuff was amazing. Where did they get it from? They got it from the Italians who were building the cars. They brought their ice cream with them, so
Yeah, Russia's really good at killing people, usually their own people, and they've had far more casualties than Ukraine has, and so yeah, there's nothing we want to buy from Russia,
no,
you know. So
no.
yeah, um,
So what
yeah,
works? What cuts through all of this stuff? Because there's things that we're now realizing don't. So classic diplomacy you've written is dead. Don't bother going on CNN, CBS, and all this. Don't bother, telling people they're repeating propagandistic narratives, etc. But there are certain stories that cut through, especially with the very powerful evangelical conservative voters. And
yeah,
it's not just a matter of belief. I think many of these people are actually far more active politically and influential politically. And because they're used to building community and they're used to getting their message across, they're actually rather good at this. So you want them to be tapping into the right narrative. And I think you've said that there's certain issues that really aren't going to cut it. Talking about war crimes, talking about legality, talking about democracy. This isn't really going
yeah,
to cut through. But something like children, that possibly will.
yeah. We had talked about before your show. Don't 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 say the word war crimes. Describe the crimes, because war crimes no longer has any meaning really, and it's something that people at the UN talk about. That's the way the folks. I grew up in Oklahoma. That's the way the folks in Oklahoma think about it, right? Democracy is something that's gotten us into wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Freedom, that's something that everyone can get behind. And look, I am here in part because Ukraine is like the greatest story of freedom, since World War II at least. This is a fight for freedom, man. These people are willing to put it all on the line for freedom. That's what I like. So freedom works. Talking, describe. Listen, the Russia's children for so what is it? She's like the deputy chief of staff for children's rights, something like that, in the Kremlin. Uh, Says that Russia has 730,000 Ukrainian children in Russia, right? And these are many of them people that were children that were taken from their parents. Their parents was killed by the Russians, or some of them were trafficked. And there's actually the Luhansk government, the puppet Russian government of Luhansk, put up a website where you can search for children, like by eye color, hair color, and like it's like you're shopping online, for genes and many of the young girls, girls that are 14, 15, 17, were dressed in like low cut dresses or legs slit. It's disgusting. And that stuff resonates with everybody, but it resonates particularly with the Christian community. And like 70% of Trump's voters identify as Christian. So that's one thing that's been really effective. We're actually making another short film about that. I'm shooting tomorrow, and so I'm just starting on this one. But That's powerful. And I'll tell you something else. We do polling of Republicans all the time. And why is it important to poll Republicans? Because Trump is president. Trump is going to be president uh, until 2029. What is today? Jonathan, do you have the today's date?
It is. We are still in 2025. Still, it's felt like a long
Yeah.
year, but we're some way
Yeah. And we got a few
away.
months to go still. Yeah. Trump is going to make all the important decisions about Ukraine. And and the first chance that Democrats will have to influence Ukraine policy is in 2027, January. And that's if they take one of the houses of Congress. And, and that's still a jump ball. So Trump's going to make all the important decisions. He listens to Republican voters. So we poll Republican voters and craft messages to educate Republican voters. Again, you tell them the truth, they make good decisions, and they just haven't had the truth. I had a opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal last week, which I was really proud of. It's the second time I've been published in the Wall Street Journal, and the first time was 2006. So it's about 20 years for me between Wall Street Journal op-eds, but maybe it'll increase in frequency. But
You got to hope,
here's
because
yeah,
20,
man.
20 years from now, I mean, that's
Watch that, man. Watch that. So that's ageism, my friend. But so Here's some of the things we noticed in the polling. One is that all during the Biden administration, the pro-Ukraine community spent time on CNN, MSNBC, on ABC, CBS, 60 Minutes. As recently as April, Zelensky thought it was important to do a 60 Minutes interview. None of those outlets are watched or trusted by Republicans. Now he's been on Newsmax twice with Shelby Wilder, who's she's like old school war correspondent, man. She's like, let's go to the front, let's get the helmets on, let's talk to the soldiers, right? And so she's awesome, and she's interviewed Zelensky twice, and then another piece with him another time. So Newsmax is great. It reaches like 24% of Republican voters. Zelensky's spending more time on Fox News. He's on the Ben Shapiro show, and Ben's perfect. He's not quite as close to Tucker, but he's ranking up there, and he's a good person that goes to head. So Zelensky is making, smart comms moves, and just as smart as what he does say is what he doesn't say. And earlier this year, every time that Putin would try to prove to the world that he was the obstacle to peace, there would be some sort of eruption between Zelensky and Trump, or between Zelensky and the Republican base, or something like that, right? So it would mute Putin as he's trying to show, hey, listen, I'm the obstacle to peace. I'm bombing cities. And so with Zelensky choosing when not to talk, Putin has shown himself to be the obstacle of peace, and like 5-1, Republicans believe that Putin is the obstacle of peace, and not Zelensky. Zelensky's at 13%, Putin's is whatever 5 times that is, and uh, and so and so this is good. Putin has also convinced Republicans that Russia is a threat. We asked people, how concerned are you about Russia sending drones into Europe? And 92% of Republicans are concerned about that. You can't get 92% of anybody to even agree with what time it is. So that's amazing. Putin did that. And 74% of Republicans now think that China or Russia could do that in America. Again, Putin's doing us a lot of favors. Just let him talk. Let him demonstrate. And so that's a lot of what we're seeing. And again, I had this piece in the Wall Street Journal. I'd welcome your viewers to go check out.
definitely. We'll put a link in the description of the video, and then we've talked about sort of war-related narratives there, and of course there's a certain degree of fatigue around it, and there's a high degree of cynicism because of Iraq, Afghanistan, and some of the, dare I say it, things that were said and done to get us into sort of previous wars and, of course, the unsatisfactory outcomes, as it were, the mismanagement of outcomes from those. So you can see why people are cynical. So there's another strand, isn't there? And this is one which our mutual friend Joe has been pushing a lot, and that is to say, let's not just focus on the negative, on the war and the misery. Let's find what Ukraine has to offer. Let's appeal to self-interest. And this isn't just, I have to say, this isn't just something that's going to work with American electorates. Unfortunately, in Britain, in Europe, in the current times, the most direct way to get what you want is to appeal to people's self-interest. It works everywhere. In fact, cuts through it, little else does. And Ukraine has extraordinary tech, drone tech, defense tech,
Yeah.
and developing civilian tech as well. But it's the defense capabilities that I think, Ukraine can help you protect yourselves against malign forces, whether that be Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, etc. There's a powerful message in here.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, there's four countries that are leading the world in drone warfare. It's China. China has about 70% of the consumer drone market. It's China, it's Russia, it's Iran with their Shahed drones. They're remarkably effective here in Ukraine. And listen, I hear the Shahed drones fly by my window most nights. You know, what I mean? I look, my stress level raises when I hear the high pitched whine. When it gets lower, my stress level goes down. But you know, again, China, Russia, Iran, and Ukraine, and and that's it. The Western countries don't have it. In fact, Peter Thiel, who's a very smart man with a lot of money, investor in PayPal, investor in eBay, and the drone company that he's invested in. Um, had a demonstration where they missed the target 4 out of 4 times, and one of the drones exploded on its own and caught fire. So Ukrainian drones, some of them do that, but they cost 500, $600. But they're far more effective than anything we've seen in the West. So yeah, in America, they call it America first for a reason. And so, which is you got to appeal to the American self-interest. And I think during the Biden administration, it's like our cause is just. That doesn't work anymore. And I tell Ukraine advocates, Ukrainians go to Congress, but this is what's happening in my country. Don't use the words Mike. If you hear the words "my country" coming out of your mouth, then you are losing. And so you've got to frame it in a ways that people want to hear it. So
And we've had I don't want to talk up sort of underperformance of Europe because actually the majority of funds, whether they're plugging holes in the budget or military supply, is coming now from Europe and the UK. Which compared to where we were 4 years ago, with Germany providing helmets and blankets, there has been a a big change in thinking, and a big change is underway in European realization that it's going to have to foot the bill for its own defense and indeed get serious about defense. Now we're not quite there. It's going to take some time, but we've come a long way, and it's I don't want to berate it. I mean, a lot of people, especially pro-Ukraine people, go like, the West is doing nothing. The West is doing nothing. I mean, that is demonstrably untrue. I mean, Europe is pumping huge amounts of money. As a percentage of GDP, of course, it's still relatively small, but it's still nonetheless a huge amount of money. And I think broadly, the need for Ukraine to survive has been widely now accepted and embraced. But we need to kind of go further. And it seems that it's not until, again, to be crude, it's not until the problem comes and bites you on the ass that people really get on and do something. It wasn't until Russia sent drones across en masse into Poland that people really paid attention. Like, oh, hang on a second. Well, Ukraine's shooting this stuff down, and we can't either effectively or economically shoot it down with the tech that we've got and the big platforms. Okay, we better start learning some of these skills and quick. And we just had this story just from yesterday, which I covered. There have been drones sighted over Belgian air bases, which are housing F-16, F-35, and apparently housing, a big chunk of the US nuclear deterrent on European soil. These places are being buzzed by, one would presume, drones that could drop ordnance at some point if they're equipped to do so, and we seem to have no counter to them. So this problem is pretty in our faces now.
Yeah. Well, listen, I think it's nice that you don't want to berate Europe, so I will. The listen, uh, here's what I see is like, yeah, they're sending a lot of stuff to Ukraine, and that's great. They're sending more money to Russia for LNG and petroleum and that sort of thing. And there was a point at which, and I think we're still there. I would have to check that the EU has sent more money to Russia for liquid natural gas for all petroleum products than they have aid to Ukraine. And Belgium right now is spending 3 million euro a day on Russian LNG, which comes up to about 71 Shahed drones. And so, and Belgium, as you know, has been sitting on 200 billion euro in frozen Russian assets, and they've
Yeah,
taxed it for $1 billion, but they've not done much else with it.
yeah.
And
It's
so, and
140
then
now because I think they collateralized about 50 billion for loans to Ukraine. So there's about 140 billion left, which could theoretically be fully collateralized.
pick your number. But yeah, they're doing next to nothing with it except taxing it, and so listen, I'm not super impressed with Belgium. And the Germany I have a lot of hope for. The UK obviously has been stalwart, with Ukraine, and northern European countries, eastern European countries, you know they're very serious about Russia. But in France is the same position. They spend a lot of money on Russian LNG, and Spain, and Spain's my favorite because every other European country's at least made up a story of how they could get to 5% spending on NATO. And Spain just couldn't be bothered, and they were actually rather offended that they were asked.
Yes.
And look, that's I am still pretty unimpressed with Europe. There's three or four people in the world that can get Ukraine weapons. One of them's named Donald Trump. The rest of them live in Europe, and are living fat and happy on cheap energy. So sorry, man.
Yeah, and well, we're signing, we're making the rope with which to string ourselves up by, as you
Yeah.
say, yes, we're going to help Ukraine, but we're also going to fund the Russian war machine. And this is the point now, isn't it? If you want a tumor to wither and die, you have to cut off its blood supply. And this is when push comes to shove. We should have zero tolerance for anything that puts money into the Russian war machine.
Yeah, completely agree. Completely agree. I'm with you, man. So let me tell you this. We're this. We're in an information war right now. And and the information war that you and I are fighting is, Russia versus Ukraine. It's Ukraine versus Russia, and that one of the battlegrounds right now is the United States of America. So one of the fronts on that war, the information war between Russia and Ukraine, is the United States. There's other information wars being fought in the world as well, and one of them is left versus right. There's a global left versus right information war going on, and so as Zelensky is successful in building support for Ukraine among Republicans, as we work every day, day and night to build and support Republicans, there's a lot of people on the left who don't recognize, perhaps, that they're fighting the left right information war rather than the Ukraine Russia information war. And one of the frustrating things for me is we've been working on this, and again, we've been successful. Republican support Ukraine is the highest it's been in 3 years. Um, so, but left-leaning people will wave the blue and yellow flag and shout unkind things at Donald Trump's supporters, JD Vance, that sort of thing, right? Which again, if you want to win the left-right information war, that's one way to do it. But Trump is going to be in office again. We've established for the next 3.5 years, and he will make all the important decisions about Ukraine. So insulting him, there's some people who believe if we could just figure out the best way to insult Trump, he'll give us the weapons. And so we polled it. And let me tell you the story of that real quick. What prompted me was the Kyiv Independent, one of the journalists there, um, published a story with this screaming headline that right-wing figures across America and Europe are capitalizing and exploiting the story of Irina Zarutska for their own xenophobic purposes, and and it wasn't a good story in particular. I mean, it was not really journalistically well done, and so because the story at the time, again, when she wrote this a month ago, was that Ukraine support is increasing among Republicans, and
Hmm.
so I polled that and several other statements. I polled that headline, and 38% of Republicans that read that headline said they were less likely to support aid to Ukraine after reading that. And the same with the several other things that we polled about. A post on X by a pro-Ukraine account insulting JD Vance was like 36%, saying unkind things about Charlie Kirk, or just pointing out that Charlie Kirk was anti-Ukraine after his death, which many people did. That drove 34% of Republicans away, and so we don't have that to spare. And the interesting thing about the Kyiv Independent story was that we polled Irina Zarutska, who is, of course, the young woman who was tragically murdered in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so we polled that, and we asked, have you seen, read, or heard anything about the story of Irina Zarutska? And then we asked those people, does this story make you more or less likely to support military aid to Ukraine? 51% of Republicans were more likely to support aid to Ukraine after hearing the tragic story of Ms. Zarutska. And so the Kyiv Independent had it exactly wrong. And I actually reached out to the author, and she very diplomatically, very nicely, and let's just say she was not collaborative in her response. And again, people on the left who may or may not be well-meaning, but certainly are engaging in the left-right information war, are not helping Ukraine. And I'll just go one more thing on this Kyiv Independent story. It reached 1.5 million people. That tweet reached 1.5 million people, including a guy named Joe Lonsdale. Joe Lonsdale is a strong supporter of Ukraine. He's a conservative VC. He holds fundraisers for JD Vance. And so, Joe Lonsdale replied to the message, are you guys working for Putin, or are you just retarded? Which was actually a very good question. But my point is why are we doing things to anger one of the few pro-Ukraine voices that we have in the White House? And so this is not everybody at the Kyiv Independent. I like a lot of those people. They actually do really good reporting from the front. But there's some people there that are, fighting the wrong information war. They're damaging Ukraine's ability to get weapons, and they don't seem to care.
I mean, by all means, they should, stand for office in the US if that's what they're
Yes.
interested in, but that's not the struggle that we're engaged in. I think, Joe's really brought that home to me. The conversations that I've had with Joe is just, if you wanna fight that battle for US,
Hmm.
US democracy and whatever, well, go fight it. Go move there, do that.
Hmm.
But if you're for
Yeah.
Ukraine, you've got to be focused on outcomes for Ukraine.
Yeah. Apparently the folks, this woman that wrote this story doesn't mind the sound of Shahed drones going by her window. I don't know. you know, Maybe she likes them. Maybe she wants to keep them. I don't. And a lot of us don't. And so we're trying to focus on the messaging that is most effective to help Ukraine.
Yeah, that's a great place to end. That's an incredibly strong message to everyone, both in the advocacy community, but also those who may be coming to this, watching it not knowing too much about Ukraine. It's worth exploring, it's worth engaging, even with people who hold, let's say, diametrically opposed political views on domestic issues. We can still engage on the topic of Ukraine
Yeah.
and freedom.
Love it, man. Those are beautiful words.
Then, Stephen, thanks so much for the work you do. There'll be links in the video, of course, to your articles, your fantastic film that I think people need to see. Absolutely, Faith Under Siege. It's an incredibly important piece of work and very moving. No matter your perspective on religious issues, it's absolutely essential. Thank you to everything you and your fabulous colleagues do.
Thanks, man. And you too. Listen, man, you are a light in the wilderness to thousands, if not millions of people. So nice work, my friend.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!